He thought the dust would have ran out eventually, but it never did. He saw it with his own eyes. The dust endlessly fell from ceiling to floor in the narrow corridor, and Sonic could only watch as it flickered through the dim red light. The red light streamed from Metal's optical screen. Just as before, each and every part of his screen was alight, and it barely illuminated the otherwise perfectly dark air duct. The steel sheet bent under him as he followed Metal. Although thin, Sonic figured it was probably strong enough to support them both. Hopefully.
Do you know where we are going?
Metal's voice cracked ahead of him. I don't, but that's the point. We can't win if we play by Nega's rules, Sonic replied. They crawled further in silence. Sonic saw nothing but the brief flicker of dust inches from his face, and although his sight was limited, his other senses were keenly aware, especially his sense of touch. He felt it in excruciating detail every time his cybernetic leg caught on something inside of the duct.
I request your feedback.
Metal's voice cut the silence. You're asking for my help? The question caught him by surprise. Metal usually demanded, not requested. Sure, what's up?
I cannot resolve Nega's motives. What does he even want? Why does he torment us instead of just achieving his goal, whatever that may be?
Metal said. Sonic shrugged. I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. I've mostly focused on not dying. Metal stopped and stared back at him. His eyes were completely absent in the sea of red.
Knowing Nega's motives would help us not die, as you say.
Sonic motioned Metal to continue. So you've thought about it. What have you figured out?
I am not sure. His behavior is unpredictable. However,
Metal glanced back at Sonic's leg.
It has been too easy. The odds don't add up. Were it not for our uncanny ability to find supplies that should not exist, like the roboticizer, we would be dead.
Metal crawled forward again, and Sonic followed. Too easy? You think he's just been playing games with us?
I cannot be sure. I still need more data, hence why I am asking for your input.
Sonic's leg caught on the thin steel floor again, and he had to shake it loose. He had no idea why that kept happening. The floor of the air duct was completely smooth. Meds, let me tell you something. You can have all the data in the world, but it's useless unless you actually do something. That's what we have to focus on. We need to act.
I see. I will consider this.
Sonic shook his head and pressed onward. Although he now felt rested, every inch of his body still ached. Every inch except his leg. His leg was painless, and it kept getting caught on nothing. Sonic slapped his forehead. He hadn't changed. He was the same, and his leg was basically the same. It served the same function, and nothing more. Therefore, it was the same. His leg caught on the duct again. He tried to pry it free, but he slipped, and his face collided with Metal's back. Metal turned around.
Sonic, are you alright? Your motor functions are impaired.
I'm fine, really, I am, Sonic said. Metal looked unconvinced. He added, I'm good as a goldfish in a carnival cup.
I do not understand what that means, but if you are certain,
Metal said. He looked up at the ceiling.
I think the space is widening. I'm not sure what is ahead, but we need to proceed with caution.
Sonic crawled forward, and the ceiling gradually receded. He sat up, no longer forced on his stomach, and ran his fingers over the edges of the duct. There had to be another vent, or an exit, or anything, but he found nothing. Nothing but dust.
What do you know about ventilation ducts?
Metal said. Look, I know I'm pretty awesome, but I'm hardly the walking encyclopedia you think I am.
I was never given data on them, and I can't connect to any network for further queries.
A piece of dust flew into his nose, and he bunched his face, speaking as if he had a cold. So, I still don't see your point.
Is it normal, Metal said, for the duct to keep going this far without running into another room?
Your guess is as good as mine, Sonic said. A slight breeze brushed through his quills. The corridor continued to widen, and Sonic stood up on his knees. He watched the dust in the red glow. It drifted forward.
If this duct doesn't connect to another room, then it must lead...
Metal's sentence broke off as the wind cut through the air and pulled Sonic's quills into his face. It pushed against him, and though he tried to brace himself, his feet slipped forward. He tumbled down the duct and only managed to stop himself as he pushed his arms against the wall. Metal swirled his head to face Sonic.
It drops off in a few feet. I have no idea what's beyond that.
The dust pelted the back of his head as the wind grew, Metal pushed his hands against the wall to brace himself. The wind howled, and Metal's crate fluttered.
Help!
The wind slammed his chassis, and although he tried to grab the wall, his steel fingers were frictionless. His grip slipped, and the wind hurled him into the darkness. Metal! Sonic leapt and threw his hand forward. His fingers brushed Metal's wrist, and he locked them around Metal's hand. Metal's fingers gripped his own. He slid on his stomach as the wind relentlessly flew down the corridor. He threw his real foot against the wall and barely managed to stop as the corridor fell sharply down. Don't worry, I got you! Metal looked up at him, and Sonic was utterly blind to whatever lay ahead. He only knew the ground grew steeper. If he could get enough momentum, he could run back to where the duct was narrow and flat. Though the ceiling was low, and he couldn't quite run, he could spin. I'll get us out of here. It'll be a breeze. Sonic dropped both his feet. He had years of experience, and soon he felt the familiar sensation of his soul gripping the floor. He could back up in no time. All he needed was to take another step. His mechanical foot screeched as it slid down the duct. He tried to press against the floor, but his steel foot slid in a way no rubber sole ever would. The wind tore into him as the duct widened. The tips of his fingers brushed the walls as he slipped and tumbled backwards. He screamed and tightened his grip on Metal's wrist. The corridor opened into an atrium of sheet metal. Sonic thrust his hand forward and barely grasped the ledge as the floor disappeared. But he could see again, and what he saw was red and yellow light streaming below. He gulped and looked down. Metal held onto his wrist with both hands and pleading with his gaze. The edge fell below them, and at the bottom of the cliff, an enormous fan tore the air. Red and orange light burned inside. Heat swelled from the furnace, and sweat dripped from his quills and down his face. His muscles strained to keep his grip. The wind lifted them, and Sonic's fingers began to slide. The air caught the lid of Metal's crate, and paper flew out. Each wad drifted into the furnace below, and burst into flames as the fan blades shredded the ashes. The wind grew, and Metal looked back at the crate. The chaos drives rolled to the edge and slipped free. They flew into the fan, and the blades tore into them. In a blinding, though brief flash, the drives shattered. The fire inside roared and burned yellow. Metal turned back.
Please do not let go of me!
Sweat soaked his gloves. He pushed his soul to the wall, and his voice wavered as he spoke. Don't worry, Meds, I'll get us out of here. Metal looked down at the furnace, and for the first time, Sonic saw genuine horror in Metal's eyes.
Sonic, please! Sonic, I cannot die!
Sonic struggled as Metal's weight slowly pulled him down. Don't say things like that. You're going to be fine. We'll get out of here, I promise. He cursed his metal leg. If only it would grip like it should, like his other foot. He needed to save Metal, and if his foot would just grip. An odd sensation welled in his metal soul, and it was utterly unlike anything he had felt before. It was almost like an electric shock, although it didn't feel uncomfortable, and he had the uncanny feeling that it would respond to his wishes. And the only thing he wished for was to save Metal and himself. His foot flew forward and stuck to the wall, so firmly he could no longer move it. He immediately shifted his weight to his foot and pressed forward with both his feet. Metal stared at him.
Your foot! Quickly, bring me up to your foot!
There was no time to question, and despite the newfound support, he struggled to lift Metal. He felt Metal let go of his hand, and the weight shifted to his leg.
Your foot is magnetic. That is exactly what we need.
Sonic looked down. Metal's entire body stuck to his foot, and with his arm outstretched, he grasped the ledge itself. Metal struggled to pull the rest of himself free, and he stuck firmly to Sonic's shoe.
Can you disable it?
Metal said. Sonic felt as if he were watching the scene from afar. He had no idea what just happened, nor if his leg was actually his, or if it just belonged in some distant dream.
Disable the magnet, just for a fraction of a second. I can't pull myself off.
As if to further his point, he tried and failed to pull his hand away. Sonic watched as the furnace burned. He looked back at Metal. Are you crazy? This is the only thing preventing us from becoming diced, roasted hedgehogs. Also, I have no idea how this thing works.
You turned it on, didn't you? Just deactivate it.
Sonic closed his eyes. His headache was back. Okay, here goes nothing. Sonic focused on his foot and tried to emulate the sensation from before. He imagined it in his mind and willed his foot to pop free from the wall. The sensation stopped. Metal slipped from his foot, but quickly threw both hands to the ledge. Sonic hung from one hand for a moment, but as his brain slowly processed the fact Metal was safe, he threw his other hand to the ledge. That solved one problem. but the duct above was still far too wide and steep to climb up. He'd have to be nearly twice as wide if he had any hope of maintaining his grip.
Sonic,
Metal said as he looked straight at him.
We can do this if we work together.
Sonic nodded. He threw his weight forward and swung up like a pendulum. His feet slammed against the wall, and though he began to slip, Metal slammed behind him. He locked his arms with Metal and looked up, the light painting the duct above a rusty orange, and it stretched endlessly upward until the darkness cut it off.
Ready?
Metal said. I'm ready. It's hot, so let's get out of this kitchen. Sonic slammed his robotic foot as high as he could and clicked the magnet on. He felt Metal's weight shift as Metal took a step higher. Though heavy, his foot was secure and Sonic held firm. Once Metal had moved, he deactivated his foot and took another step. They continued wordlessly, and though the corridor grew narrow, Sonic kept the familiar rhythm by alternating supporting and climbing. Metal grew closer and closer as the corridor narrowed until Sonic could feel every inch of his chassis against his back. At last, the corridor straightened, and darkness overtook them again. Sonic's muscles collapsed, and he fell to the floor. Metal rolled over underneath him, but Sonic was exhausted. He continued to lay with his face in Metal's engine panel as he panted. Eventually, Metal said,
Are you alright?
Yeah, I just need a minute to catch my breath. The corridor was impossibly narrow, so Sonic had to crawl backwards on his stomach. Metal turned to him and clicked his screen back to full. Sonic stared inches from his face, and the red glow illuminated his cheeks.
I think we should go in the other direction,
Metal said as he turned away. Sonic wiped the sweat from his brow and followed. They crawled in silence. Metal, how did you know my foot was magnetic? How did that happen?
I didn't know. Well, not until you activated it anyway. After that, it was obvious.
Sonic rubbed his eyes. But how? Are there any other surprises in my new leg?
It is unlikely.
Metal paused, and Sonic looked ahead. There was a tiny source of light streaming in the distance.
The roboticization isn't instantaneous, although it can certainly look that way to the untrained. It can take several hours for the new components to solidify, and during that time, the nanites are especially sensitive to external stimuli.
And that means? Metal stopped and looked back at Sonic.
Do you remember the Chaos Drive? The one I pulled from the egg pond and snapped in half?
Yeah?
I was not aware of it at the time, but when the drive snapped, it released a burst of electromagnetic radiation. That radiation must have hit your leg at a critical moment. It was enough to solidify the structure such that you were endowed with an extra ability.
Oh, Sonic said. It was all he could say. Metal motioned to the floor. Ahead, light streamed from the air vent, and Metal crawled toward it. Sonic hesitated, then followed. So, that means my leg? Metal locked his fingers around the vent.
Yes, it appears you can magnetize your leg at will. This is an advantage you didn't have before. Any extra ability is superior, is it not?
Sonic blankly stared as Metal lifted the vent. He tried to crawl forward, but his leg caught again. He was the same if, and only if, his leg served the same function, and nothing more.